Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
So I like to start each episode by asking you guys what you've been listening to lately.
Yeah, I've been listening to this Indonesian drone record from 2017.
Yeah.
It's called Tara Wang Sawalas is the band, and the record's called Wancy. So
Okay.
I don't know, but remember that Park Jiha record we both liked? It reminds me a lot of that. It's really dope.
What about you, Darren?
I've been listening to a lot of Mozart's The Magic Flute. Just kind of randomly jumped into opera for a little bit. That's been pretty much it. I was listening to a classic recording. I haven't listened to a recent one or anything. While I was in Vegas, it was perfect.
Oh yeah,
that's what you do,
Very, very diverse listening. I went on a pretty big Tom Waits kick lately, and I knew that last year they remastered all of his early albums, but I didn't know that the year before that they had remastered all of his later albums, from 1999 on, and so I was really enjoying revisiting some of those and actually listening to some of those for the first time. But it's honestly really strange that the only period of Tom Waits that hasn't gotten remastered, reissued now is the golden period, Swordfish Trombones, Rain Dogs, Frank's Wild Years, Bone Machine. It's maybe that should have been the biggest concern because they really do need the remaster. Come on, guys, get on it. But all right, let's turn to today's topic. Like a lot of people, we've all been really enjoying Thom Yorke's new solo album, Anima. And while I think we all agree, it's been pretty interesting to read review after review claiming that after a pretty spotty solo career, Yorke has finally made a record that can hold its own against Radiohead's peerless discography. These claims made us want to revisit Thom Yorke's solo debut, The Eraser, from 2006, which was, quite shockingly at the time, the first Radiohead-related album since Pablo Honey to get pretty mixed reception. But then we got thinking about the biggest shock of all when a few years later, Radiohead themselves underwhelmed fans with 2011's The King of Limbs. And we decided it would be interesting to reassess both of these legendary disappointments in tandem. Now, I know it's not a great idea to begin a podcast by asking whether the topic even makes sense, but do you guys agree that there's something to be gleaned from comparing and contrasting these records? I always associate them in my mind because, like I said, it felt like the first times the mighty Radiohead seemed to stumble, but we can't forget that In Rainbows dropped just a year after The Eraser and was pretty instantly declared a classic.
Yeah, I don't think at the time I equated the two, because they are separated by In Rainbows, which is undisputably a classic. But, looking back, as you can see the bigger picture, I do always sort of I almost forget that they are separated,
Yeah, I think in 2011 when The King of Limbs dropped, I had probably forgotten about The Eraser for the most part. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I listened to it, a good deal when it first came out, and we can get into the history there. But but by the time The King of Limbs came out, I kind of just had forgotten about it. So really, just putting it into context of thinking about Radiohead as a whole and the points in their career where they may have stumbled, it makes sense, I think, to look at both of these together.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of actually really interesting similarities and differences that I want to try to get into. Just to sort of preview things we'll talk about in a minute, the recording techniques are kind of similar in a weird way because they both revolved around sampling themselves and sort of building songs from that. They also kind of feel maybe you disagree, we'll get into it, but the aims of these projects are a little different from most Radiohead releases, which are, they're not meant to be major step forward masterpieces. But again, a lot of differences as well, and those might be just as illuminating as the similarities. Let's dive into the records, though, one by one, and see if we can return to these bigger questions. The Eraser from 2006. Can you guys describe the state of your Radiohead fandom back in 2006, as well as your first impressions of The Eraser?
Yeah, I was a pretty big fan at the time. I went out, I bought this record on day one, probably at a Best Buy or whatever, on CD. I remember being a little underwhelmed from the get-go. It never really clicked for me. I remember wanting it to be a lot better than it was and stuff, and it just never reaching that for me.
Yeah, I was a massive Radiohead fan. I think by this point, was really excited, with anything that was coming out. Obviously, we can get into the story about when In Rainbows dropped, but like even this album, when it came out, I was like devoured it. You know what I mean? It was Radiohead, whatever. I don't care what it is. And I think that sort of made it seem like it was way better than I thought, you know what I mean? It didn't stick with me, I guess, like a lot of other Radiohead records did in terms of like coming back to it over and over again. It was really like, I listened to the record a lot. I think there were some like live studio recordings that kind of came out around that time too that I really loved, like of Cymbal Rush. But then in the years to come, it kind of got, put way back there, especially after like In Rainbows dropped, What about you, Gabe?
Yeah, it's not something that I listen to very often at all, but it is something that kind of like holds a special place in my heart for a couple of reasons. One, I was thinking back, and this must have been like the first new Radiohead release since I became a completely obsessive fan.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
I think it's hard for me to remember exactly. I'm sure I had heard like Creep and probably Karma Police and stuff, but it was like the Hail to the Thief era that I learned about them and everything. So then this build up to the Eraser, it was really, truly exciting for me. Also, the album came out on my birthday that year. And I was like, it leaked and I refused to listen to it because I felt like it was fate that it was coming out on my birthday. So I like waited. I'm reading descriptions, like just imagining what it sounds like,
Even though
I finally
got
it
available to you.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was so exciting. But let's try to describe the sound of the Eraser. Yorke and Godrich, the producer who's produced like every Radiohead thing, they're apparently kind of toying with samples from Radiohead's library of original samples. So you've got like the piano on the title track, that's Johnny Greenwood playing in sort of a demo. You can hear it's sort of like low bit rate, low quality kind of a thing. And he's just sort of sampling and messing with it. And It Rained All Night is built from a sample, like a really screwed up sample of The Gloaming, apparently off of Hail to the Thief. Black Swan is actually built around a rhythm track that was recorded by Ed O'Brien and Phil Selway, the drummer. How would we describe the sound? Do you guys get a sense of like, that's what he's just sort of like tinkering with pre-existing stuff?
Yeah, it does feel like a little tinkerish. Like it feels like Thom at home, like messing around, just like trying to work things out. It sort of seems like the first pass in maybe writing like for Radiohead kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it becomes like very obvious that the rest of Radiohead like are not here. You know what I mean? That it very much is like Thom Yorke in front of a laptop computer, basically, headphones on, kind of just listening and trying different things, like you mentioned, Dan, but not having to like sort of pass it through Johnny Greenwood and the other guys. Yeah, and like having to expand on things or whatever. It's just like, throwing things out there and kind of going with what he likes. I mean, it's very much like this is just Thom Yorke alone in what he wants. You know what I mean? What do you make of it, Gabe?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a weird sound because I sort of agree, and I guess I don't want to jump into like criticisms just yet, but it sort of sounds like stuff that maybe even didn't get the Radiohead okay, like he had this stuff kind of sitting around, and it all sort of feels to me like stuff that might have been on Hail to the Thief. It sort of reminds me of the Hail to the Thief era, and yet it's like him, it just gives me the vibe of like him on tour buses and stuff, just kind of like tinkering on his laptop with these, little unfinished things and sort of building entire pieces out of them. It's also very clean and very, almost very sparse in a way. Like the instruments and everything are so clean and, and then you've got like the vocals that are so
that's the craziest thing, like I've listened to Radiohead for years and years and dozens of times, and like I think most Radiohead songs I don't know the fucking words to because the way Thom sings, but here like they're very upfront. They're almost normal, like you can sing along to some of these songs.
Yeah, there just seems to be like a lot of like space, you know what I mean? Space for the vocals, space for all the things that are happening. Like everything seems like very clearly separated, you know what I mean? Whereas like a Radiohead song just sounds like every possible idea and sound that could fill up the space is there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It just, I don't want to just describe it as like just being thin, but it really just, it feels like it's lacking a lot of layers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like just kind of one of the guys in Radiohead. You know, it's like it doesn't feel like it's a separate thing. Like it's missing everybody else. You know?
Yeah, and I think that you also get the sense on a lot of songs that there are a lot of like real instruments, for lack of a better word, electric guitars or like a electric bass that's clearly being played.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it seems like the whole track will be sort of built in laptop fashion around that.
Yeah,
so you get songs like, like In It Rained All Night. It's got like this kind of cool bass line, and like that's the song part. And then the rest is just sort of these like almost amateurish, like kind of skittering, glitchy beats. And it's just like, it gives it like a demo feel, because it's like, I wrote this bass line and then I put like sort of a placeholder beat on here, and now I'm singing in the most like, it's totally clean. There's nothing layered. There's no like overdubs. There's no reverb yet on the vocals. Does it give it, like, I basically couldn't decide all week. Does it feel like really overproduced, this album, or really underproduced?
It's weird because it feels like Thom at a laptop, which you would sort of like assume would be kind of demo-y sounding, which you would associate with being like sort of low quality, but it's like the crispest, highest quality demos ever, which gives it like this weird, like, it's like when, some sort of lo-fi artist gets big and has $1 million, to spend recording. It's like sort of like a feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. It does sound like overproduced with like without enough. I don't know. I keep going back to like layers. I'm thinking of like things that like Johnny Greenwood would have added in, like this crazy, like the strings from like Pyramid Song, something like that. You know what I mean? Like all these things that you just associate so easily with Radiohead. But imagine if those things were like removed and it was just Thom at like a piano, maybe without the really crazy drums coming in and stuff. And I feel like you're getting closer to like what the Eraser is, you know what I mean? And it's the bare bones.
Yeah, again and again, I feel like the song starts on a real instrument of some kind. So like you could take, I mentioned In It Rained All Night. Harrow Down Hill is actually quite similar. I think the sequencing is a little weird on this album because you get like the two moody bass-driven songs like right in a row or whatever. But it's like the bass line was recorded, and then everything was sort of filled in. Like on the song Analyze earlier on, it's like it's like a piano line, and it's quite like played quite percussively, very clean, very crisp in your headphones, and it's just like that was the thing he recorded. He wrote and recorded like a sort of a simple song that way, and then sort of filled it in with beats. And so it sort of adds like an amateurism, but it also adds like a weird, there's something weird about, he's not really, I think, committing to the electronicness of it, because it's so weird to me, actually. I think it's something we should do on an episode, because maybe it's just our perspective from 2019, but the idea that Radiohead went electronic feels so wrong and bizarre. Like, there are guitars all over Kid A, and also like, there have been synths on rock records since like the 60s. Like what is, so anyway, but he's not really like, it's like he's trying to make an electronic record, but not really committing. So, and what that leads to, I think, are problems where a song like In It Rained All Night is kind of like an alternative rock song, but it's hard to rock when the only real instrument is like a bass. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like I remember there's this YouTube video that's really cool where Kanye, in his early in his career, he has Timbaland in the studio, and he's kind of like asking him for advice on how to get the kick drums on the song Stronger to like really bang, because it's hard to actually do that. And, Kanye struggling with that early in his career. And I feel like Thom here, he just can't get a song like that to rock. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
it's like you said, there's like this weird sort of like tiny bit of amateurism, but like from an absolute professional. It's just like he's like slightly out of his element, like I feel like in Radiohead, maybe it would have been his job necessarily to get that kick drum kicking. Maybe Phil would have done it or somebody.
Or they would have layered it up. There would have been like an electronic plus. Yeah.
And so it's like he has like the idea, but he like some of them, like the execution sometimes like falls flat. And I think it's like because he benefits from having 4 other people around all the time, helping him. When you go I feel like it would be hard to go from that to just yourself.
Right.
And don't you kind of feel, Darren, like Black Swan is like much funkier because it actually is built from a rhythm track that Phil and Ed did together.
Right. Well, then that, there you go. That kind of makes sense. I was going to mention, think about songs like Arpeggi and like Nude, songs that had been around for so long, and you can go out there and you can listen to all these various versions of the songs, and they're generally pretty different than what ended up on like In Rainbows, right? I mean, this is kind of what I think is happening again here on The Eraser in a lot of ways. Like a lot of these songs, had they been through the ringer of, Radiohead for a few years, may not even be recognizable. You know what I mean?
Right, that's true.
But this is what we have. And I just think that it's kind of clear that he's just not quite, I don't know. The feeling I get is like, they were probably working on In Rainbows during some of this time, obviously. And, maybe Tom just had a lot of ideas. I imagine he's a songwriter. He's probably got tons of little things going on. He needed an outlet. He needed to kind of just get it out there, right? And I think this is what we ended up with. Not necessarily like a fully thought out, solo record of Thom Yorke. You know what I mean?
I think.
Yeah, go on.
I think like looking, from 2019, now that we have like Anima as well, like, you can see that he's gotten better at it, like you can see that he progressively like learned how to do it. When you look at like Tomorrow's Boxes, Modern Boxes, whatever, all that, like you could see him like advancing. And now like this new record, it seems like he's figured it out for the most part. And he like knows how to do these things that like here on The Eraser, he was like amateurish at.
Yeah, and maybe there's a little bit of self-limiting, because I remember actually reading and feeling a little bit disappointed before the album came out that he really didn't want to like bury his voice in reverb and stuff like that. He wanted to sort of let it shine through and be clear, and it almost feels like he's treating the instruments the same way. Like I want them to be very clear and crisp and not do the layering trickery and the studio trickery that much. So it's like simplified on purpose in a way. I also want to ask you guys though about the quality of the songs here, because there's something kind of weird about this album to me, that almost all the songs are very songy. I can't think of a better word, but they're just like verse, chorus, verse. And then usually like wordless cooing over the outro, like almost every time. They're like what you were saying, Darren, it strikes me as like, these are not songs that he just had kicking around. They were songs that like already got vetoed by the rest of Radiohead, and they're such simple little songs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, and if you look at like Radiohead B-sides, I think some of what you hear in those B-sides are similar to what you end up getting here. I mean, I'm not saying that every single song here sounds like a B-side. I mean, some of these songs I think are great. I mean, coming back to them, I was, kind of pleasantly surprised, and I, kind of was obviously bopping my head and singing along, because like they're good songs. They're just not, I guess, great. They're not as moving. And maybe I'm just putting too much, pressure on Thom Yorke because I'm thinking of Radiohead, or I'm comparing this work to like, Radiohead's greatest works, and that might be a little unfair.
Don't you agree though, Dan, that like they're kind of like, it feels like just simple little songs, and in a way I feel like, I don't know, is he like trying to achieve, because it sounds so like simple, but is he trying to achieve like radio play or something? I mean, because they just sound like such tight songs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they are, whereas like a Radiohead might it'd be more expansive, have more atmosphere to it. Post OK Computer, Radiohead's not on the radio or anything, and here it sort of seems like he's stripping that kind of stuff away. I mean, like Darren said, some of the songs here like are actually like pretty great, like little pop songs. Like
let's talk about that.
The Eraser is like a fantastic song. In fact, like it being the opener, and even this week was the first time I had listened to this record, and several years, and I forgot like how much of a like banger that song is, and I was like, oh man, maybe I'm wrong about this record. I forgot how awesome it is, but you know, it doesn't hold the quality all the way through. But I mean, I think like Harrow Downhill, I thought that's a pretty good song. Analyze is pretty decent. There's nothing that's like outright awful here, or even really bad. There's just like, it goes from pretty good to a little boring.
Yeah. What are some like highlights for you, Darren?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Black Swan. I think that one's fun. You know, I like Atoms for Peace. That was one that I kind of always liked a lot. I feel like it's a little bit long. Cymbal Rush is actually a favorite of mine, but it's actually not the album version that I love. It's one that he did. What was that? Didn't he like something underground or whatever that he did with like Godrich? I can't remember, but they were doing a lot of like in studio live takes or whatever, and there's one of Cymbal Rush that I really love a lot.
Yeah, in my opinion, a lot of the stuff here is kind of like middling, just forgettable in a way, like kind of pleasant and fun, but there are two masterpieces as far as I'm concerned, which are Atoms for Peace and Cymbal Rush. And the reason is, I think those songs, you know, the whole record has kind of like this antiseptic feel, and sometimes it's like, oh, he's trying to rock a little bit and it's just sort of falling flat, and you kind of wish the Radiohead, the band, was there, you know? And these two songs to me like really just embrace the antiseptic quality of laptop music, you know? Like they're kind of stiff on purpose. Atoms for Peace in particular sounds like kind of a next generation version of No Surprises to me, because it's got this kind of lullaby-ish, you know, like weird little looping bass line thing, and it just it like sounds a little dead inside or something, but that's the point. And Cymbal Rush, similar. It's like got the strangest beat, and it's just like instead of like a warm, clean piano, it sounds like almost like a cheap keyboard he's playing or something. And you kind of agree with it. It's like he's embracing the challenges that he doesn't always do on this album.
Yeah, I think Cymbal Rush is a good one to point out, because it, again, like what you mentioned, like the live one that I'm talking about is like that clean piano, so I think I kind of like prefer that, because it's again, you know, Thom Yorke at a piano, right? It reminds me a bit of like motion picture soundtrack in a way that, like, you know, the song could be so easily stripped away and so simple, but there's all these like different layers to it. That song, Cymbal Rush, I think, and Atoms for Peace, which you mentioned, they stand out not just because they're great songs, but they don't really sound like the rest of the record. Is that fair to say? Like, I just don't think that either one of these like seem to have started with some demo or something that already existed. Like, it truly sounds like something that may have started from scratch during this time.
Yeah, I saw like an interview with Thom Yorke, and he said about Atoms for Peace that was one of the 10 minutes written in a hurry sort of things. So I think that does, you know, that implies rushing, but it also, I think, implies that it is like a new thing, like you said, Darren, not like a old Radiohead, you know.
Start from something, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I think that's the key. You kind of got to like embrace the qualities. If all you have is a laptop, like, I don't know, make the best laptop music possible. But we've talked about this a little bit. I don't know if we have a lot more to say, but, you know, I'm thinking retrospectively, like, how does this album sound now? And also, how does it fit into Radiohead's discography now that we're looking back? You know, I don't want to touch yet on The King of Limbs, but I think things really change there because, you know, to me, this sounds really like leftovers mostly from Hail to the Thief, like I said. And yet, In Rainbows is also very song oriented. But maybe like a lot less electronic. I don't know. How do you see this album kind of fitting into their career here?
I mean, I think like the place in its discography is like a sort of big fans only. You know, you're interested in hearing like what didn't make the Hail to the Thief cut, even if these songs aren't literally from those sessions. You know, it at least like sounds like they are. I don't think it's like, you know, I wouldn't say it's essential or anything, but I think it does foreshadow a little bit going into In Rainbows. Like you said, you know, this record really kind of songy, and In Rainbows is too. But In Rainbows is like songy, but filtered through the Radiohead committee, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking like, because I listened to In Rainbows today, you know, and like the song Body Snatchers, you know, like dun, 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 na, 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 and like I could just imagine it on the Eraser where it'd be like that distorted bass line, na, 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 but then there'd just be like, gloop, 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 you know what I mean? Like it'd be just like In It Rained All Night or something with just like the distorted bass line and then kind of the additions. But what do you think, Darren? How does it kind of fit in looking back?
I don't know. I was actually surprised because I had forgotten when the Eraser came out before I looked at the years and everything. I was thinking that it had come out right after In Rainbows. I was very surprised to think that this came out just a year before In Rainbows, because to me, personally, I just don't see like hardly any similarities between those two albums. You know what I mean? I really do think, like you mentioned, Gabe, that these are like leftovers of like Hail to the Thief, but you know, this is like, you know, Thom Yorke had like compartmentalized this and like was just, yeah, this is just my little thing. But his main focus with Radiohead was like a totally different, you know, canvas basically. And the way that album turned out to be, you know, one of another 10 record, and for that to be so close to the Eraser just is, you know, so jarring to me.
Yeah, well, actually, you know, so you raise an interesting question. Is the next thing I wanted to get to, which is what was Yorke trying to accomplish with this album? So Pitchfork's 6.6 review, pretty damning. I think, you know, if you're around at this point of Pitchfork, the idea of Pitchfork giving a bad score to something Radiohead related at this time was just mind-boggling.
Unheard of.
But their review, I think, is pretty reflective of wider opinion at the time. They call it a, quote, solo quickie, a modest record that, unlike Radiohead's albums, is, quote, not an attempt to remake the wheel, but rather pretty much exactly the kind of thing you'd expect Yorke to make in his bedroom. They even speculate that it was released just a few weeks after the initial announcement in order to mitigate against the weight of expectation. Johnny Greenwood also said that Thom would go mad if every time he wrote a song it had to go through the Radiohead consensus, and yet a lot of people felt like most of these tunes, you know, were missing Radiohead's input. So do you think this is like a deliberately kind of low-key affair? Like he was like, I don't want this to be a masterpiece? Or was he trying to, do you get the sense he's trying to like get hits or even step out of the gate like, I'm Thom Yorke and I can stand without Radiohead?
Nah, I kind of feel like, and maybe it's projecting, but I kind of feel like it's Thom needing to do something, you know, like, and he's making these songs, you know, like you said, on the tour bus and downtime, you know, whatever, probably just to keep himself busy. And you know, if you made them, why not put them out? You know, why not make some money off of it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. You know, obviously we're not there in the studio or in the whole songwriting process, but I think enough has been written and said that the process of writing a Radiohead record sounds brutal. Yeah. You know, it sounds incredibly time consuming and energy consuming. And there's just this whole build up and the weight of expectation album after album. This, just like the way it's described, I mean, for it to be released right after that, I mean, I honestly think that this was meant to just be, you know, a low key thing. Like, hey, I've got these extra songs that I've been working on. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it because it's not a Radiohead release, or not. You know, it's not like there was an Eraser tour, world tour that followed this record or anything. It was just like a side project, like, you know, somebody like Da Vinci, just a one-off small-time painting or something that he just wanted to work on instead of, I don't know, whatever masterpiece that he was currently working on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, and there's even kind of like a just funness to when he did tour, which I don't know when exactly it is, because the timeline doesn't make sense to me. If like In Rainbows came out so soon, I don't know if he toured immediately or if he waited a little bit, but you know, that's when the band Atoms for Peace forms, because he kind of gets like Flea in there and, you know, other stuff, and it's like, you know, it feels like kind of fun, like, oh, let's just have like do a fun, it's all of our side projects. I think like a guy from REM was in it and stuff, and it's like, oh, this will be a side project for all of us. To me, it feels sort of lightweight and intentionally kind of low-key like that. And yet he almost can't help himself but try to craft like an album with a nice arc and like a grand crescendo with cymbal rush and everything. And I appreciate that. But do you think that, you know, is this what you kind of prefer? I mean, like, because do you wish that Thom Yorke at this time had been like, had gone like David Lee Roth and been like, here I am, I don't need Van Halen or whatever, and like, or are you kind of glad that we have like an album that's just kind of his sketchbook?
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I would rather we got this than Radiohead break up,
Well, certainly. But I mean, not for them break up, but like him trying to make a big statement. Would you rather he did that?
No, because I think like Radiohead is his baby or whatever, that's his artistic output. This is just maybe, the little side thing you did for fun. Like you said, touring, those are probably his friends. It's way more low key than like the Radiohead world tour, where they got semis bringing giant light shows and stuff, It's probably like a lot of fun to do that kind of thing. And, that's just what this feels like. And, I sort of prefer that because it doesn't like nobody was like, oh my God, is Radiohead going to break up after this? Because it didn't ever feel like that. It didn't feel like Tom's like, I don't need Radiohead. That's true. Here's a Radiohead record. It doesn't feel like that.
I'm sure Thom Yorke has plenty of ego, but I think you need a lot of ego to be like a David Lee Roth type of like, I don't need Van Halen anymore.
That's true.
Yeah, but it's like an interesting alternate history. Like, what if, not like trying to break up or not trying to like go ego mode, but just like, what if he actually sought out to try to make something as good as Radiohead? It just feels like he didn't, and maybe that's for the best. But anyway, I think all of this ties really interestingly to the King of Limbs, which we should turn to now and kind of bounce back and forth. But first, let's fill out like the next chapter of our personal histories. How did you feel about In Rainbows, which dropped in 2007, toward the end of 2007? How hyped were you for the King of Limbs when it came out in 2011? And what were your first impressions?
I loved In Rainbows. In fact, I think In Rainbows might be my favorite Radiohead record. It's like, sometimes I'll listen to it and I think sometimes you listen to Kid A or something, but it's definitely like top 2 or 3. So I love that record. I have since the day it came out. So I was, very hyped. Any Radiohead record since I've been a fan, which
sure,
I've was hyped for. And then I actually remember like when this came out. I was going to the fair with like a group of some of our other friends, and this like dropped like early, like late at night, like into the morning, whatever.
Yeah,
or leaked, whichever. I remember like
I think they just released it early.
Yeah. That's what it was.
Like a day early.
Yeah, that's what it was. I remember like waking up hearing that had happened, and downloading it, like listening to it. Luckily it was short, listening to it, getting ready.
Yeah.
And then, in the car on the way to the fair, like listen to it, probably 2 or 3 times. I was pretty into it, like from the get-go. So much so that like the sort of disappointment with it surprised me a little bit.
Oh.
So for me, within Rainbows, I remember like vividly staying up late. I think it was actually a school night, and staying up late, waiting for that album to drop, and listening to it like 2 or 3 times in a row, like before going to bed, because I was just so hyped and so excited. Just like you kind of mentioned, Gabe, this was like the first Radiohead, Radiohead album release that since I had become a fan, what was coming out. So I was just all about it, and I felt like it was an instant classic. Like I just loved it from the moment it came out. Now, some of the songs I had already heard because they were obviously playing them on their tour and stuff. So
I was really excited into the bootlegs at that time.
Yeah, I was really excited to hear how they finished up with those and stuff. So it was kind of already leaning towards loving it, and it just blew me away. And even at this point, I'm willing to say, I don't know if it's the best Radiohead record, but it's definitely like the greatest, like one that is like it's the easiest to come back to and like re-listen to. Sometimes I feel like
I completely agree.
I think Kid A is still my favorite Radiohead record, but I feel like I have to like prepare myself to listen to that entire record, in one sitting. With In Rainbows, it's like I could throw it on basically anytime, and it's great. As far as like the King of Limbs, I was excited. I mean, I'm excited about every Radiohead release, but not as excited, I suppose, as like In Rainbows. But I was kind of like immediately disappointed by it. I suppose we'll get further into that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I within Rainbows, I followed the whole lead up very closely. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but obviously there was the pay what you want thing that blew everybody's minds, and I paid $0. Loved it so much. I went back and gave them $15.
Oh man!
So, like,
you gave more than
like they deserved
10,
it.
I think.
I bought the box set, so I give them like 90.
Oh, that's true. I did that too.
Oh,
still got it.
You still have it? Yeah, I still have it.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah. So I was just completely obsessed. Still love it. King of Limbs. Funny, kind of an interesting like album release experience. Which, like you said, Dan, this is just back in the time of my life when I don't know why, but I would just stay up till like 6 a.m, just on 4chan or something, like doing nothing and just listening to music or whatever. And then just like, I'm excited for whatever 2 days from then when the King of Limbs is supposed to come out. But all of a sudden there's posts like it's out early. It's on their website or whatever. And so, I just stayed up until like whatever. I don't even know if I went to bed. I stayed up till like 8 or 9 a.m. just listening to the King of Limbs over and over again. And I think there was sort of an underwhelming feeling for me at the time. I got really convinced, which we'll talk about this as well, by the conspiracy theories that this is part 1 of a 2-part album. But let's describe the sound of King of Limbs. So a little bit of background, whereas In Rainbows was developed, the band has said, from live performances, the King of Limbs was constructed from samples, like I mentioned, of the band playing, which were then like looped and edited and obviously combined with them perhaps playing over the top. You get the feeling that they're like 2 drummers all the time pretty much, but lots of glitching and looping. So how else would you describe the sound of the King of Limbs?
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like produced, like it doesn't sound like a band playing it like you'd hear at a bar or something. It sounds put together, not in like a bad way, just like in a electronic music kind of way. It also feels like a little it's got like more room to breathe than a lot of other Radiohead stuff, especially maybe In Rainbows. Like there's just,
what do you mean?
Like there's just sometimes there's empty space, I feel like, in this record. Like it's got like you can get inside of it, whereas like Darren and all mentioned during our Eraser thing, like a lot of Radiohead's like very densely layered and everything,
right?
And stuff is here. Just I feel like at times there's more atmosphere and room in it. What would you add, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I feel like there is a lot of like kind of empty space. I feel like there's a lot of like meandering kind of in the and throughout the album, and I guess what I mean by that is sort of just like taking one idea and sort of like jamming it and maybe adding a few layers here because they have multiple band members to do that with. But I don't, it doesn't I don't know, it just doesn't seem to go anywhere, a lot of these songs. Like, they don't have that classic Radiohead, like, moving moments of, like, just awe. They just kind of stay pretty steady in the middle and come and go, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how else to, like, really describe it.
I mean, to me, it actually contrasts really interestingly with The Eraser. Because if The Eraser is, like, too songy for me, this is like almost not songy. It's really about vibes rather than songs. Right. And honestly, that's like the kind of music that I like. It's there are choruses sometimes and stuff, or something you could call a chorus, but a lot of times it's just like sort of this vibe, like these loops or whatever, and they're just going to kind of like feel it and jam it a little bit. And in fact, I wish they would, jam almost all these songs longer, because it's almost like they're treated, I think what you're saying, Darren, they're almost treated like, a 4-minute pop song, but they're just definitely not. Yeah. They're just kind of like a groove. Right. But as far as like the instrumentation and stuff, it's I think it's much denser, while also agreeing with you, Dan, that there is a lot of space, but it's just much denser also than The Eraser. Lots of that layering that we were talking about missing from The Eraser. And, I always think of this album, I was sort of compared in my brain to like something like a forest, the cover art has like these sort of spooky forest creatures or something, but it just reminds me of like the music video for There. I don't know if you guys remember that. He's like kind of running through in like this weird.
That was my first experience with Radiohead, and I thought they were like the strangest band.
Yeah. it's like a weird, like going in the woods with like spooky, whatever the grim fairy tale stuff goes on. It just sounds an album that sounds like that, and instrumentally, it feels like really dense, like that, like being in like a dense wood or something. And yet, it's kind of like the tale of two albums, despite how short it is, because it's like the first half, you get almost like these Afrobeat kind of like plucky grooves that are like sort of interlocking and like lots of polyrhythms, it feels like, and stuff, and it's just so dense, and you feel like you could never pick everything out. And yet all of a sudden in the second half, like it just gets so spacious and empty. You know what I'm saying, Dan?
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, in the first like half of this record, like I love the drums, and I think that's one reason that I've always sort of liked this record, and especially from the get go and everything. Like the drums in Bloom, it's like a weird like electronic Afrobeat kind of thing, like that. It like almost feels wrong. It's like a rhythm you're not so used to. I love the drums in that first half, but yeah, that sort of goes away, which that works a little better, on actual literal record than it does as most people listen to it.
Yeah. What do you make of that sort of transition, Darren?
Yeah, I think I guess I never really thought of it quite that way, because the album just feels so short. It felt short to begin with, and I felt like we never got anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I suppose you're talking about like Lotus Flower kind of being the start of that second half,
mm-hmm.
right?
I mean, it's still got that like beat. It does seem to like get a lot more spacious there, but then like Codex is just a piano ballad with like sort of a low pulse sort of driving the song, and then it just feels like Johnny is just like twiddling knobs and like messing with reverbs and stuff. I don't even know what the rest of the band is doing, but and then like weirdly, the very next song, Give Up the Ghost, is the same thing with like guitar kind of.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you guys see them on this tour?
No.
Yeah, I did.
Any of the shows? You did.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember like how the stage looked, like with those really long?
Yeah,
cylinders?
like the long light bars.
Yeah,
that would like they look like rain sometimes and stuff.
Right, and so I vividly like remember that. I remember like when they were playing some of these songs, and I actually felt like I enjoyed them more live on like the live space, because they were obviously having to play more with their instruments, obviously, than just they used loops and stuff with effect pedals and everything, which was fine, but it gave it a little more life to me. Like a lot of this record to me just feels a little like stale almost, you know what I mean? Like it's lacking something in each of the songs that just doesn't really. Now granted, there are definitely some songs I love, like Codex is I think a gorgeous song, and actually feels a little bit different than most of the record, right? But
and do you feel like because one hang up I have is like it feels like Johnny is kind of like adding some weird sound manipulation in the distant background, because it like the record so far has sort of required that. Do you feel like it's contributing to the song, or it's really just a beautiful piano ballad that kind of doesn't need that stuff?
I mean, I like it. I think it's very like Radiohead, and like when the like horns kind of like kick in. I mean, that is like again like a like pyramid song is what I kind of think of when I listen to that song. So I that to me felt very familiar, Radiohead wise.
Right.
A lot of the rest of the record just didn't quite feel as familiar.
Yeah, I think those little like accompaniments, like I think that's what stops it from sort of sounding like the Eraser does, like thin and missing things.
Yeah, I just think for me, like my biggest hang up is that I really like the jammy vibe on the first half of the record, and then it sort of transitions into like this ending, and I feel like it hasn't really earned that yet, because it just Lotus Flower is kind of a banger. I mean, it's pretty spacious, but it's like very fun, and
it's a fun video too.
Yeah. I mean, it's very
dancing crazy.
Yeah, and it's like it actually feels very danceable, and it's just like I think it's just a gorgeous song, because it's like the chorus actually like de-escalates the groove a lot, and then when it kicks back in on the verse, it's like really, really awesome. But just in the blink of an eye, we're on to Codex, which is so empty and spacious and feels kind of like Thom Yorke sitting at a piano, and there's like a little bit of sounds, and the horns and stuff are really nice. Then we go immediately to another one, but I mean, I think Give Up the Ghost is a great song. I love how there's kind of like multiple vocals going on.
Yeah.
You know, some of them are like really distorted and stuff, and they start like sort of intersecting with like different melodies and stuff. It almost feels like sort of a fucked up blues song or something, but I could kind of imagine like almost somebody in a coffee shop like playing this, you know. That's how kind of like tight of a song it feels like. But just like after just the densest kind of Afrobeat, weird glitchy like Flying Lotus style thing, you then just all of a sudden get these two songs that both sound like closers.
Yeah,
like isn't that awkward?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think the record would benefit from like that first half breathing more, and then there should just be a couple extra songs or something that split up. You know, those two, and
it needs like one, like what?
At least one,
song
yeah.
or something.
Well, I like if you put a song in between Codex and Give Up the Ghost, and then one between Give Up the Ghost and Separator, I feel like, you know, that would help a lot. You know, it would really like make this record something that I think everyone would.
Do you feel like Separator's a good closer though? I feel like it's a great song before the closer to me.
Well, yeah, actually, it's difficult because it has like this kind of nice, like joyous sort of like coda feel. You know, the album seems to have like a little story of being like, I mean, it gets quite hairy there, I think, like in this woods that I'm imagining, like on Feral. It just sounds like horrifying. You know, it's like the first song where, and it actually sort of continues through the rest of the album in an interesting way where like, you know, he's like sampling them playing their instruments, but then sampling and fucking with Tom's voice becomes like a major part of it. And Feral is just that, you know, just like it's almost like Amnesiac level fucked up. And anyway, I feel like Separator is like the happy version of that. Like, oh, we made it out of the woods or something. It just feels like a really nice ending. But the problem is that both Codex and Give Up the Ghost feel like, you know, proper closing songs. Maybe like Separator just doesn't feel, Darren, like a proper closing song after those two.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it. It's just, to me, it feels like you mentioned, you have these two closers, and then like suddenly things pick up a little bit with Separator. Just seems very, very awkward, I guess. And you know, it's not like every Radiohead record needs an amazing closer or whatever, like The Tourist or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to have that, but you kind of gave us two closers right before the song. So to me, and I think that sort of adds to the fact that I felt like, oh, this is only like one half of the record, you know? Never mind the fact that like Thom Yorke is saying, if you think this is over, then you're wrong or whatever.
Right. He said, yeah, it was a big clue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of the pacing and sequencing here and the ending, Dan?
Yeah, like I said, I think it needs like something to separate those all three songs that like could be closers. Like they need Separator needs separating from you know, that.
I'm almost okay with like how it goes. I just think something between Lotus Flower and Codex like needs to kind of slowly de-escalate us. Actually, one of the singles from this period, Staircase, I think would be kind of a cool candidate. I think that's a great,
should definitely
great song.
have been on this record.
And I want to return to that, but I think part of what we're kind of getting at, I want to jump ahead just a little bit, is like what Radiohead was trying to accomplish with this album. So Thom Yorke said, if we're going to carry on, we need to do it for a new set of reasons. And cover artist Stanley Donwood said that whereas In Rainbows was very much a definitive statement, the band wanted to make an album that was more transitory. So then it was fitting that it was criticized for not being like another Radiohead milestone and not revolutionizing the way albums are released, you know, the way that their previous album had. I mean, that must have been a lot of fucking pressure to be like, not only do we have to like change music, we have to change the music industry with every album now. But Pitchfork's 7.9 review basically reflects that. It says the band's signature game-changing ambition is missed. And of course, the length was a big problem for a lot of people, and it added to that kind of like transitory quality. So, you know, what's weird to me is that I 100% get this, that like sometimes what you got to do is people have really gotten accustomed to you making a masterpiece every time. And we were just talking earlier about why Thom Yorke might have wanted to make The Eraser, because like probably making Radiohead albums is a drag.
Right.
Like you got to do a whole lot of work to like make it perfect, you know? And everybody's expecting perfection. And after In Rainbows, people are expecting like even higher levels of perfection. And so I get why it's almost like with King of Limbs, they were like, this is going to be short. We're not going to like labor over it too much. Like let's make music fun again and just kind of like do some jamming. Like we're not gonna like work these songs out to where they're absolutely perfect. Like we're gonna do some just grooves and stuff. And yet the album is sort of undercutting that mission a little bit by trying to have an arc that feels really rushed. You know, we talked about like on Kanye West Yay, to bring him up for the second time, how it's got like a redemption arc, you know, across like 7 songs or whatever. It feels like really weird to, you know, that quick. He's like going from thinking about killing you to like now everything's good. King of Limbs, to a lesser extent, you know, it does that thing like, oh, we're skittering in the dense mysterious forest, now we're like sort of into this like tranquil kind of spacious open thing, and now we've even got Separator, which is like a coda. It's got like Separator is like a coda, like the happy like as the credits roll, and it even has an interlude track with Farrell. Like you don't have a lot of space to be doing codas and interlude tracks. So you guys kind of get what I'm saying. Like I can appreciate that it's meant to be sort of a lesser, more fun, carefree thing, and yet they're kind of undermining it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to speak to the you know, just sort of like laying back, I think that's fine, especially after, I mean, how many classics after classics did they release? You know, I think sort of the best thing to do is to not try to top it. You know, when you get to that point where like basically the only way to go is down, and you know you're never gonna top it, you might as well like kind of purposely let yourself down easy. You know, and so I don't see any sort of problem with that. But yeah, I think they do undermine it a little bit, because I agree with you. It does feel like there is some sort of like narrative arc of this record that is like, it's a feature-length arc that's in a short film package, but it's maybe it's just hard to turn that off, you know, like since they've been doing that for all these records like beforehand.
Yeah,
like maybe it's just like hard to not accidentally do it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, maybe it would have been too easy to include Staircase and a couple other songs and make this similar to another Radiohead record. I mean, how many bands, when you look at their discography, have at least 3 objective classics that change the way music is done? You know what I mean? Like probably none, right? I mean, I think it's much better. I much more prefer them sort of exploring the way I feel like they are on this record than retreading ground that they've kind of already covered. You know what I mean? I'm not necessarily saying they're pushing the envelope, but I feel like they're sort of like whittling down at something that is very like Radiohead-ish, because it's not like we haven't heard stuff like this before. You know, this isn't like breaking new ground by any means, but to me this sounds like a much more focused, like, let's not try to push the envelope or change things, let's just like whittle, you know, let's really drill down into something specific here. You know, maybe it's like this is like a jam record or something. I don't know.
I mean, I think there's that, but there's also something about like, you know, it's really weird, and we can kind of return to this a little bit, but it's like there are 4 songs that come from this period that were released as singles later, and I think that some like weren't totally finished or whatever, but you know, like there was no deadline that they had to get the King of Limbs done by. You know, like their label would have been fine with them, you know, taking a little extra time, I'm sure, but it's like, it feels like they purposely did not put these songs on it because they didn't want people to think like this was a big statement. Like they really wanted it to feel small. Like that was really important to them. And so it's a very short track list. They could have padded it out, but then everybody would be like, oh, this is like a 45-minute thing and it's not a huge step forward. What a disaster. Instead, it's almost like they were trying to, you know, do something like, hey, everybody, this is small. Like, this is not going to be a masterpiece. Like, shouting it from the rooftops. You know what I'm saying, Dan?
Yeah, and I like that is one thing I like about this record. And, you know, now in 2016, we have like the this record's 37 minutes, I don't think people would even say like, oh, that's short, you know.
That is another good point.
It's like kind of normal length now. So again, you know, they sort of were ahead of everybody. We just didn't know it yet. Yeah. But I think that's good because when you have something that's a smaller package, like, you know, some people like sort of call this like an EP. Like, I mean, if you get the actual like vinyl, it is just a 10-inch, two 10-inch records. You know, so it almost like is a little EP-ish, especially of the time. And, you know, I feel like the way we're talking about, like, you know, they're trying to like mitigate the disappointment and stuff, like, implies that we think this record's bad and all. Like, I don't think that. I think it's fine that they did it. You know, it's hard to say that.
Well, do you think it's like a great record?
I don't think it's like a great record. I mean, it's a great record. It's not like the greatest Radiohead record, if that like makes sense.
Simply because it doesn't aspire to be.
Yeah, I mean, you know? Like it sort of aspires to be second tierish. But again, you know, that sounds like bad. But it's like you got to remember, like a band like this that has so many like records that are game changing and classic and stuff. You know, like a second tier version of that is better than a lot of people's top tier. But yeah, I think like it just sort of aims to be that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because like I can't imagine, you know, OK Computer and Kid A like starting out as like, yeah, let's change the game, guys. Let's make a record that's gonna, you know, blow everybody's minds. I mean, I
you don't think so?
Well, I mean, I don't know if at the outset you're intending to do that. I'm not saying that it was just an accident either. And at the same time, I can't imagine they go into the record studio saying, all right, guys, this is not going to be in Rainbows, all right? We're going to do something lesser than that on purpose.
I get what you mean. I get what you mean, and I agree with you. Like, nobody goes in the studio and says, all right, this is going to be the greatest record ever made.
I think some people do. Like, I think that, you know, like Kanye, I don't know why I keep bringing him up today,
Kanye
but it's like...
probably does. But
no, but I mean, not out of like, you know, being an egomaniac, but it's like... It's not that. It's that he's like, when he made My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, you can just feel that he was like, I want this to be my magnum opus. Like, that's what I'm shooting for. I'm not shooting for like an EP or whatever. You know, this is going to be the thing. And I feel like, you know, maybe it develops sort of organically, but I just feel like Radiohead wouldn't release something unless they thought it was a big step forward. They're just that kind of band. And I feel like they sit down and they go, let's get this thing like perfect, you know, before we show it to the world. And this one, it just, based on like reading their interviews, they just feel like so worn down by having done that.
We're not going to repeat that again because it was such a miserable experience. Let's try something a bit like easier, right? Is that what you're sort of thinking?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, you know, The Eraser, which is like Thom has these songs, you know, and he's just kind of like, you know, there's the whole Radiohead gauntlet, you know, that you gotta go through to like get things passed. And, you know, I just want to do this. I just want to knock these songs out, you know, while I'm on the tour bus. Like, it's going to be fun. And I'm going to jam with my friends when I tour it, you know? And it almost feels like Radiohead ends up doing the same thing themselves, which is like, let's just have fun with this. Like, let's not make it such a drag, you know? And so it's weird because, I don't know, Darren, do you think of this as a, you know, maybe not a great record, but is it, you know, a really good record?
I hesitate to even want to call it really good. I mean,
basically, do you feel like they succeeded at what they were trying to do, but that makes for not a good album? Or do you feel like they actually just kind of failed at making a quick, fun thing?
I mean, I think in some ways it is a bit of a failure, only because if they had succeeded at making like a quick, fun thing, I think I would be eager to like come back to it, you know, like as like I want a different, refreshing take on Radiohead, and that's not really how I feel. Like, if I'm in a mood for Radiohead, I'm going to In Rainbows. You're going
for a masterpiece.
OK Computer. I might visit the Bends. Like The King of Limbs and even A Moon-Shaped Pool, for that matter, are kind of low on that list.
I like this record, but I do agree with you, Darren, that this is sort of like, when I listen to this album, it's because I'm like running through the whole discography, or I've sort of exhausted the other ones or something. Like, if I'm just gonna go back to Radiohead, it's usually In Rainbows. But yeah, it's rarely King of Limbs, and in fact, like Moonshaped Pool, I tried listening to this week, and you know, it didn't last for me. I don't think.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's something like
we reviewed that though, didn't we? On
we did.
Yeah. Go listen to that.
Well, I think we're going to repost that. Is that right?
Yeah, we are. It'll be a review of the OK Computer reissue box set, and then a Moonshaped Pool.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean that just came out a couple of years ago, and I already feel like it needs to be revisited because
yeah, exactly.
Like, the reception is not matching up or something. But yeah, as far as King of Limbs, you know, honestly though, I feel like I am a Radiohead fan such that I cannot like put OK Computer on anymore. Like I've just done it too much. Mm-hmm. And when I'm in a Radiohead mood, I reach for like Amnesiac or The King of Limbs, like a weird one, because they're the ones that I haven't spent, you know, thousands of hours, you know, with, and they're the ones that remain kind of mysterious because they're a little bit like of an enigma, you know, they're a little bit hard to figure out. And I really feel like after this week, listening to a lot of The King of Limbs, that like the first half, I have kind of like the problem that you were saying earlier you have with The Eraser, Dan, which is like the first half gets me so hyped about it, and then it just like kind of ends suddenly. I'm so into the jamming. They should have like, I've said this before, I think, but the key is when you have like expectations you can't possibly live up to, you got to put up like a very challenging and divisive album, you know, like they should have just been like doing these Afrobeat glitchy jams over the course of like a double album, you know, and every song would be like 18 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And then you'd have like, it'd have a reason for being like, there'd be people that would like really defend it, you know, as their most challenging and like rewarding work. And there'd be people who totally hate it. Like, and then after that, you're kind of free to do whatever you want. This is what they should have done.
I think I agree with you because like it would become a record that like even if I didn't like it at first, it's like I gotta come back to it. Like it's Radiohead's double album. There's so much there, you know. Like there's got to be something there. To me, when I'm like looking at the list of the discographies right now, and like when I look at King of Limbs, I'm like short Radiohead record. Moving on. You know what I mean? Like there's like what you know. It needed an identity and something like what you described, Gabe. I'm already like I'm on board for that. You know.
Yeah. So one question we kind of touched on a little bit, and maybe already answered, but you know, what would happen if you added the non-album singles from this period? We got Super Collider, The Butcher, The Daily Mail, and Staircase. I've noticed that, I mean, Super Collider, The Butcher, I think is just okay, and a lot of people feel that way. But there are people who really say, like, if you Rate Your Music, there are a lot of people who say, like, the Daily Mail Staircase single is better than all of King of Limbs. And they are both knockout songs. And there are also a lot of people, so at this time they released the King of Limbs Live from the Basement, which is like sort of a live in studio performance. And there are a lot of people that say that is better than the King of Limbs because it actually does add these songs and mix up the track list a little bit and feels a little bit more complete. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I listened to that King of Limbs Live from the Basement today, and I hadn't listened to it since probably when it came out. You know, I watched the video or whatever. And I remember like thinking that was like really great and really awesome. And today I like sort of struggled to get through it. It was like a little boring, and I thought like the songs like sounded all sort of stilted. Like the performances just weren't like as good as the actual record. You know, Daily Mail and Staircase are good songs. I like both of them, and they are good on the Live from the Basement thing. But I think, I don't know, you either could use them as like what I was saying, like putting those two as like the separators of the end of the record, but then you risk of the, you know, we tried to make a regular Radiohead record and maybe we didn't live up to it, or
which
you
did not want to do
exactly, or you can go this route, like I said, and keep it small and not have those in there, but still release them as a single, which is a little tricky. You know, you're still getting them out there. You know, and you do this. So I sort of like it depends on their goal. If their goal was to keep it light, keep it small, I think they succeed. If that wasn't their goal, then maybe they should have stuck them in there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Basement stuff. I certainly don't think it's better than the record itself. Was this also like they filmed this, right? And were they like separated in like rooms or something like that, or were they all in one big room? It was one big room, right?
I think they were in a big room.
Yeah,
I don't remember. It's been so long.
But you know, I felt like, I think at the time when Staircase came out, like, wasn't Thom Yorke talking about, like, yeah, maybe we'll just release songs one at a time instead of doing albums. And to me, I just have always associated that idea with those songs, that, like, they just wouldn't fit on the record. Like, with this, the way the idea of this record seems to come about, it just seems like it would be a bit of bloat, which is weird to say about, an 8-song Radiohead record, but I just feel like they would not make the record better, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Super Glider and The Butcher feel like bloat. Yeah. Like they're just whatever. But the Daily Mail and Soakers are really fantastic. I do think you run into that problem of adding them. But one thing that I did not know until today, I wonder if you guys know it, but the Daily Mail Staircase single is actually just like kind of properly mixed and mastered performance from Live at the Basement. Like, that's what they are.
I didn't know.
They sound so good. It's crazy because, like, I think that, The King of Limbs Live from the Basement has not been released on CD, I don't think. It's just DVD. And so if you have it downloaded, it's like a DVD rip. And it really just sounds like the mixing is very poor, I think. And it's like really quiet. It's really awkward how there's so much like studio chatter in between every song. It like really kills the vibe.
Can't understand what they're saying.
Yeah, it's not built for headphones.
Yeah, and if they did this mastering job that they did on this single for the whole thing and cut out the studio chatter, it might be better than The King of Limbs, honestly, because it sounds fantastic, and I think the performances, unlike you, Dan, I think are really cool. So that's got to be like a TBD. I'll agree when I hear it in proper versions. But
King of Limbs naked or whatever, right?
Yeah,
there you go.
There we go. Okay, so sort of summing up, although there's a lot that I want to sum up. So do you kind of feel, like looking back now that there's there is some relationship between The Eraser and King of Limbs? Does it feel like Radiohead / Thom like learned something or continued developing something? Some ideas were started with The Eraser?
Kind of not. The Eraser feels like the era of Hail the Thief and Rainbows to me. King of Limbs, it's not these little songs like we talked about. It feels a little different,
I mean, I think that they did learn something here. I mean, I feel like The Eraser was an easier recording process for Thom Yorke. I feel like The King of Limbs was probably an easier recording process for Radiohead. And I feel like they might have enjoyed that because I kind of think the Moon-Shaped Pool sort of continues this era, this sort of trend that started maybe with The Eraser. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like In Rainbows doesn't really fit in with this era of Radiohead.
Yeah. I get the feeling that In Rainbows was such a drag for some reason. Like, it was really hard. And I kind of wonder if they were like, should we just break up? And then Thom was like, actually, The Eraser was really fun because I didn't give a fuck like about making it perfect. What if we did that? I could just sort of imagine like, that seems to be like in a band, it's not really remarkable in its own right. But in the case of Radiohead, these two albums that are kind of like low-key, kind of tossed off things, they really stand out, like that's, to me, that feels like these are the only times that Radiohead has allowed themselves to do it. Do you guys kind of wish, like, because between King of Limbs and Moon-Shaped Pool, that was like 5 years, almost 6 years. Do you wish we would get like more Radiohead, but just less masterful quality kind of stuff?
No, I don't. I don't mind the wait. I feel like it would cheapen it. If every year we got a new Radiohead record, it would stop being so exciting when you got a new Radiohead record. So I honestly like with bands like this and stuff. I kind of like the slow release schedule because it's more exciting, gets you more hyped up.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last week though with Autechre. Like, I even mentioned Radiohead. Like, what if between albums Radiohead released like 7 EPs? That sort of showed like every step along their development, like Autechre does. And they'd be a very different band, but there might be something interesting about that. You think so, Darren?
No, and I think even last time I mentioned I think that would hurt there just would be too much Radiohead. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I want to hear all of that. 'Cause, you can explore the B-sides for that stuff. I mean, they have a lot of them, and they're fun to listen to. But I don't think I would want like an EP after EP. You know what I mean? Even at this point, like it's really weird the way I feel about Radiohead because they're so accomplished. Like they're already the greatest band that has basically ever been around, at least in recent times, right? And they have such a storied history. They've got like several incredible albums, like game-changing albums. They're still together. They're still putting music out. You know what I mean? And every release, I never really expect. I don't want to say like a return to form because that's really not how I feel about a Moon-Shaped Pool or the King of Limbs because those aren't like attempts to like return to In Rainbows, Kid A, or anything like that. But my expectations are lower. They're just lower. You know what I mean? Like I just don't expect to be completely blown away by Radiohead. I want to see them just challenge me as a listener to just think about something differently. Like Gabe, I know the double album thing that you mentioned, like just something like that would just be, so interesting and would really spark a new interest in them because it's something they have never done before. If they come out with another 12 or 13 track album, 40 minutes, 45 minutes or whatever, I'll be excited, I guess, but I just won't be thinking, and I probably won't think that it's that amazing. You know what I mean? Like,
here's the real dilemma. The real dilemma is that for a long time, like every Radiohead release, I feel like worried that it's going to be the last one. And it's because they're the kind of band that like doesn't seem like they're willing to release something unless it is a game-changing masterpiece. And the King of Limbs was like the only time in their history that they kind of were like, fuck it, let's just put something out. Yeah. And would you rather have a bunch of King of Limbs, or no Radiohead at all?
Huh. Yeah.
I think I would say no Radiohead, to be
wow.
honest. Yeah. I mean,
wow.
They've done so much already.
I agree. Like it's kind of good that the Beatles broke up when they did, like we didn't get a bad Beatles record. And at this point, we haven't got like a bad Radiohead record. But this one's maybe a little lackluster. So if you're just getting lackluster after lackluster, then that becomes bad. And it cheapens it. Like you have to say like, oh, I loved Radiohead, from before, In Rainbows or whatever. Like you have to do that. I would kind of rather have a band that's, 10 tens or close to it, than a band with a bunch of 10-10s and then some 6s and 7s.
Should Dylan have stopped releasing new records?
Oh, don't ask him that. He can't.
He can't that's a whole nother podcast.
I think it's really interesting to revisit these two albums, The Eraser and The King of Limbs, and like imagine an alternate history where Radiohead weren't such perfectionists, and like what would the world be like? But in sort of reflecting back on these albums from, or especially The King of Limbs from 2019, it's like I was struck, like you said, Dan, by how kind of funny it is that 37 minutes is really not a short album at all. It just felt like that at the time for some reason, where it was like shaking people's worlds. Like there has to be another one. Another thing that's kind of funny is that, and we talked a lot about this on our episode, Why Are Albums Getting So Short and So Long, which you should listen to if you're interested in this. But, King of Limbs, like, if they had released it a few years later, they would have just called it a mixtape. And then there'd be no expectations. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but this is what the mixtape does in today's world, which is like when an artist wants to release a project but doesn't want people to like have it, they don't want the weight of like having to follow up their last thing. So they put out, a mixtape like If You're Reading This, It's Too Late by Drake, like, no, I'm not trying to follow up, this Nothing Was the Same album. This is just for fun. But it's kind of like if everybody loves it, awesome. If nobody likes it, hey, it was just a mixtape. Like they almost could have done that. Do you think they're predicting the mixtape era in a way with The King of Limbs?
I mean, I get what you're saying. I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say that they consciously, did that or anything. But I get what you mean.
I mean, maybe not, because I think Tom was kind of onto something with the idea of just releasing songs. I mean,
Yeah.
look where we're at with like the streaming world. I mean, people
That is
release
true.
albums, but
Yeah.
really it's just a bunch of songs. You know what I mean?
And Lucy's are, you know, a lot more
I know.
of a thing than they were, you know, 5
I know.
years ago even.
It's kind of sinking in for me. You know, like when iTunes came out and stuff, everybody was like, oh my God, what if this kills the album? And then it seemed like the album was just fine. And then I realized like recently that, and we kind of talked about like with your son, Darren, but like, it's not going to be us. We're not going to change our listening habits, but the next generation who never had albums is not going to give a shit about them.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now I believe the albums will die 100%, but like we'll buy them, but like the millennials will, but like we're going to get too old.
We'll be the old guys still talking about albums.
I know, like it'll be so archaic. You mentioned something interesting, Darren, that you don't think A Moon-Shaped Pool feels like Radiohead going back to grand statement mode, because I kind of do.
Really? I mean, maybe it's obviously worth revisiting, but I kind of felt like it was just another, not another King of Limbs, but like still in that like realm of like good but not mind blowing.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, it's like a full album. It ends on a ballad. Actually, I was kind of thinking about that. That's interesting about the King of Limbs, because it's like they do try to kind of end on an upbeat note, but it strikes me as like Codex would be the song that would close the album if, you know, like if it was a normal Radiohead album, and it's almost like they're deliberately not wanting to close on the piano ballad. But like, you know, Moon-Shaped Pool closes on True Love Waits. It's got like these epics like Daydreaming and stuff. I mean, what do you think, Dan? Do you feel like it's a big statement?
Yeah, I think it's like going more back to that than King of Limbs. I think maybe we're thinking it's not, like the only reason there's a discussion is that it maybe didn't work as well as it had in the past or something.
Yeah, but it feels like they tried.
Yeah, I think they at least tried.
God, we're gonna have to revisit this album.
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay, so I want to save a few minutes to talk about Anima, the new Thom Yorke album. How does it tie into all of this? Is Anima a grand statement in contrast with like basically his entire solo career? Tom has been like these kind of tossed off things. The Eraser, the Atoms for Peace album, which was just kind of like, hey, I had a lot of fun playing with these guys. You know, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, I barely even listened to because it's such a like tossed off piece of shit. You know, it's like several songs and then just some like fucking around ambient shit. He was more into like releasing via BitTorrent or something than making actual songs. But does it feel like Anima is being celebrated and succeeds because it's actually trying to be a big statement, or no?
I think it's trying to be a statement. You know, I mean, like that movie he made and stuff, you know, like that's statement-y. And I think, you know, that's just where he succeeds, you know, did it so long with Radiohead. You know, it's just like in his artistic wheelhouse and stuff. But besides all that, I think, like I said during the Eraser review, I think he's just sort of gotten better at working on his own, you know, like whereas the Eraser seemed a little rushed, a little underdeveloped and stuff. Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, which my wife loves that record, and I hate it so much. I've heard it way more times than I want to.
Wow.
But you know, like even there, like he was maybe a little better, but it still sort of is like fucking around in Fruity Loops or something. Whereas like now he seems like fully fledged and
it sounds gorgeous.
Yeah, exactly. Like it doesn't, like when you listen to this record, it's the first one where you're kind of not like, I wish the rest of Radiohead was here.
Exactly.
You know?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
It's like I didn't miss the rest of Radiohead when I listened to this record.
Yeah, you also kind of feel like, oh, he didn't like find a new drum program.
Yeah,
He's having
exactly.
fun playing with it. He is like, you don't even think about that it's an electronic album. It just feels like he's made.
It just sounds like an
he's
album.
used the sounds. Yeah, the sounds that are the best to serve these songs. Do you kind of agree with this, Darren?
Yeah, I do. Like, I don't really listen to that record and think, like what you mentioned, Dan, like, where's Radiohead? Or,
right.
You know, what demo from a Radiohead throwaway is this coming from? Like, none of that comes to mind. In fact, it's not even like these are the elements that Thom Yorke brings to Radiohead. It's not even that. It's like, this is just Thom Yorke, like an artist, like if in a world where Radiohead almost doesn't exist, right? Like, I can listen to this and not think about Radiohead too much or like wonder where they're at or anything. And that's an accomplishment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is, because in some ways it does feel like we are harder. The whole world is harder on the Eraser because it's coming from Thom Yorke, you know, harder on the King of Limbs because it's coming from Radiohead. And the fact that we would be inclined to be harder on this, and yet everybody seems to just really be enjoying it and loving it and not worrying about where's Radiohead. You know that it has to be actually very, very good. But I do think there's sort of an interesting little like, maybe he did learn a few things from the Eraser and King of Limbs, because I feel like the last song, Runway Away, is it's a little separatory, you know, because it's kind of like a weird, fun ending, whereas old Thom Yorke would have put Dawn Chorus right at the end, like definitely, fucking definitely, because it's the most like heart, you know, wrenching, just like moving thing and such a ballad. And he was like, you know what, let's get that over with early and then like get back to the fun, you know, like lotus flower dancing kind of fun. I feel like there is a little bit of that spirit here, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Well, do you think, last question, Anima's sort of success is proof that Thom and maybe Radiohead as a whole just aren't meant to be fucking around and having fun? They should just drop classics and aim for the, you know, shoot for the stars or the moon, I guess is more fitting. I couldn't really decide. Would that just be kind of like true for everybody? Or are there some people that kind of excel at the tossed off thing?
I think you should always, if you're like releasing something, try to do, you know, the best you can. But then some of my favorite artists are like, you know, Young Thug and Gucci Mane, like the most notorious, you know, just
that's true,
toss off kind of thing. But I guess I sort of wish they weren't. So I'll say that, yeah, I think everybody should just try to drop classics. And yeah, I think Radiohead included. You know, like I like King of Limbs, but like you said, like, would you rather have a Radiohead that stops and has only ever released classics, or would you rather a Radiohead that's released 100 King of Limbs, you know, for the rest of the time?
Yeah.
And I'd rather have the one that just only had classics and didn't fuck around.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. You know, Radiohead, I feel like, and I've said this before, but like they're basically in a league of their own. You know, they're kind of peerless in a lot of ways. You know, I think the Beatles are a fair comparison, but the Beatles broke up. Like, we didn't see what happened after Abbey Road necessarily. You know what I mean?
Right.
With Radiohead, we kind of, you could almost argue we've had their Abbey Road, and now we're seeing more what's happening next. You know what I mean? So it's hard to say. I would want them to drop classics, like, you know, selfishly, right? But at the same time, I think about like Kanye West, bring him up now for a third or fourth time. Dark Fantasy was incredible, and like the albums that came after that, yeah, sure. I was sometimes thinking like, man, if he had just hammered at some of these a little bit longer, like he did on Dark Fantasy, we'd have another Dark Fantasy. But then we wouldn't have, you know, St. Pablo or whatever, right? Like, I think we'd be missing out on stuff. So I'm glad we have the King of Limbs. I'm glad Radiohead tried this. I think that their model should probably go back to, let's just make game-changing classics, because that's truly what they're great at. You know what I mean? Unless they're going to really go really far and give us that double album that Gabe is promising us.
Yeah, I really can't decide. I thought about it all week, but it's like I really prefer when artists like go for it. It doesn't have to be a classic every time, but I appreciate like when they're trying to do something that like they, you know, you just get the sense like, oh, this band cares if I listen to this. Like they really feel like the world needs to hear this. And there is the odd project that like feels kind of light and breezy and is cool. You know, I was listening to Nashville Skyline by Dylan the other day, and like that doesn't feel like
that's a good example.
He's not like, all right, I'm gonna top you know, Blonde today. You know, he's like just kind of doing this thing, and it works. It like really serves the style of the music in a nice way. But that's really rare, I think. Like really, really rare. Most of the time, try to make something that like you feel like the world needs to hear, and that is especially true if you're Radiohead.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's enough for this week. So what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on air. You can email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. We'll have a new episode in 2 weeks, but next week, like we mentioned, we'll post old review of OK Not OK, the OK Computer remaster, and Moonshaped Pool from our old podcast, Metaphoric Music. So look for that next week. If you like the show, help us out by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that is at Pop Shield Pod, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
So long.